Looking at the Vikings offseason so far, we can get a sense for how they feel about J.J. McCarthy, but we got to be careful. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. And wow, the wheel keeps on turning. So we got a lot to talk about. Today is Town Hall Tuesday. So I'm taking your questions, and later I'm going to go over some of your spiciest takes that you confessed to me anonymously. No fear of repercussions. And man, boy, there's some in there y'all are not going to like. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Before we get into the Town Hall Tuesday, a quick news break. The Vikings officially released Garrett Bradbury. We discussed the ramifications of this on Friday on a live show, or it was like Thursday night on a live show. So you can go to the live tab on YouTube, or the audio went up like normal if you want to hear more about that. But this was a pretty obvious kind of follow-up to signing Ryan Kelly. So I feel as though there's not a lot more to say about it. The Vikings did release him with a post-June designation. So what that does, Garrett Bradbury had $2.4 million in prorated bonus left that was already paid to him. That the Vikings have to account for on the salary cap. The rest of the salary was unguaranteed. It dissipates into nothing, but there's $2.4 million left. They could either pay it all right now, or if they post June him, 1.6 of that, so 2/3 of it, goes into next year. That's what that does. So I'm rounding to, it's like $814K or something like that. So they take $800K this year. They take 1.6 mil next year. They're just splitting it up. Kind of a small potatoes thing, but if you're into nickeling and diming, put that on your abacus. But let's move on to Town Hall Tuesday. So if you ever want to submit a question or a hot take on Town Hall Tuesday, you can find a Google form in the description to any podcast episode, YouTube description, or show notes on whatever podcast app you're listening on, and submit something to me. Just click the button if it is a question or a hot take and let her rip. First one comes from Jesus, who asks, because J.J. McCarthy didn't play his rookie year because of injury, does that qualify him for Comeback Player of the Year if he has an insane season? Jesus, I am going to spin your question into a much larger discussion. But to answer it, yes, the parameters for Comeback Player of the Year are ridiculous. They are so unbelievably vague. I think everything counts. Because Sam Darnold got votes and was a candidate, a real candidate for it, even though they specifically and expressly said that coming back from suck is not a thing. They gave it to Joe Flacco 2 years ago. They made the declaration that they're not going to do something like that again, and then it could have been Sam Darnold. It ended up being Joe Burrow, but still. But yeah, I think coming back from an injury, even if you didn't fall down from anywhere, if coming back from an injury and having an insane season, I think it absolutely makes you a candidate. And I believe Joe Burrow won it the Super Bowl year. You'll have to check me on that. But he was certainly a candidate, even though he got hurt his rookie year as well. He played a little, but I feel at that point, you're splitting hairs to that. Yeah, of course he is. But I wanted to kind of spin this into a larger point that I wanted to make. So we'll pause Town Hall Tuesday, I guess, and make it. What do the Vikings think about J.J. McCarthy? I kind of wanted that to be the main topic of the show. And before we get on to more questions and hot takes, and if you look at the way that the Vikings have structured all of their contracts, I think it's a really easy thing to parse. I think it becomes very clear what they're doing. They have borrowed every dollar that they can from 2026. Everything. They have spent it all ahead of time. But they've done it all on 2 or 3 year deals. So the money the 2026 money that they are spending is going to give them utility in 2026. It's all going to be players that are on the team, unless they want to start cutting guys or whatever. But there's so much of that is restructurable, and that's a really important part of this, that it's not going to be a big deal. I'll explain more in a sec. But the Vikings are essentially using 2 years worth of money at once to get as many players in as possible on 3 or more year deals, right? Jordan Mason's on a 3-year deal. Will Fries is on a 3-year deal. Even guys like Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, 2-year deals, like that's okay too. Those are all meant to, it feels as though the Vikings are really going hard over a 3-year window of JJ McCarthy's rookie deal. And then in the fifth JJ McCarthy year, the fourth from now, then you're going to have to pay him or 5th-year option him or have that discussion, and you're going to want a little more cap flexibility for that. But I think for 25, 26, and 27, they can be pretty freaking reckless. And even 28 and 29, they can still be pretty reckless. They just got to be ready in like 2030 to start absorbing big cap hits from a QB contract, assuming that, we get all the way down there and they still want to have this QB under contract. That we got a long way before we decide that we want him to be the guy for, 5-10 more years. But whether JJ McCarthy is good or not, you want to give him that opportunity, right? So doing this, I don't even think really says, oh, they've got all this confidence in JJ McCarthy. Like, I don't want to do that. I do think that they have a ton of confidence in JJ McCarthy. The Vikings have not been very dishonest about these kinds of things on the podium. Like, they've been pretty forthright about the way that they feel about their players, good or bad. And they rave about him all the time. So, like, I feel inclined to take them at their word, at least vaguely. But also, they see him as... they see his contract as the parameters for the Super Bowl window. The other interpretation that I have seen is that the Vikings are essentially torpedoing their 2026 cap, going all in for one season in 2025. And this kind of like spins into an Aaron Rodgers thing. They're going to go all in for one season in 2025 and then tank. And because they hate JJ McCarthy and he sucks, and they're actually just going to like trade him away and tank. I think that is very Madden. I think that's the kind of team building strategy a 12-year-old would come up with, and I don't really respect it. Think about it for 2 seconds, it immediately falls apart. For one, the 2026 cap, they will have a red number on over the cap. Don't be alarmed by it. It's scary looking, but it's only scary looking. Okay, it's all bark, no bite. The Vikings have basically most of their commitments are either in that year are either in base salary or guaranteed salary, both of which can be restructured. So they can take as much of that money as they want and move it down the road, spread it all out into void years, do all kinds of stuff, and essentially restart the journey that Rick Spielman was on, which, I mean, he started doing that stuff in 2015, and the Vikings didn't really have like a true killer cap crunch where they had to cut players that weren't necessarily underperforming until COVID like ruined the salary cap in 2021 and they had to like be 1-year deal Andes. So that 2026 number is unbelievably flexible and is going to be totally effortless to get out from under that. They're going to be able to put this together for 2027 if they want to, or I don't know, maybe they all just want to like throw their hands and give up. But I don't really think that they think that way. And I don't really respect you if you think that way. Let's go back to quitters never win. Let's go back to the questions. Sly asks, if last year was the get Darnold paid year, what's this year's theme? Great call on the last year goal, by the way. We can say it was a definite item success. Well, thank you, Sly. Yeah, it was definitely a success. Get Sam paid, dude got $100 million. Although the contract structure is weird. There's definitely like a big out after 1 year. So the Seahawks are kind of tempt to hire on Sam Darnold. But either way, he still makes, 30 mil on that in a year. We're doing great. The goal in 2025 is a Super Bowl. I mean, they're setting it up to be, this is the Super Bowl run. They wanted Joe Burrow 2021 Bengals this. Second-year quarterback coming off an injury. Lots of great stuff going on around him. Put him in the right situation and make a run. And that's going to be the goal now for the next 3 years. 25, 26, 27, here's your window. And then you got to pay JJ McCarthy. And if you want to continue the window, he has to be up to a certain level. And you have to, start figuring out your money. Those are all conversations we can have then. We don't have to do that right now. We're in a 3-year quarterback rookie contract thing, and let's surround him with as much veteran talent as we can. Sammy asks, why didn't the Vikings bring back Cam Akers as RB2? And after the Mason trade, what are the chances we trade for him a 3rd straight year? Look, I'll never say 0, but probably not. I don't think Cam Akers would be unwelcome in this room still. I don't know. I don't think he got signed out of this as of this recording. Yeah, there's nothing yet as of this recording. I mean, you usually bring 4 or 5 guys into camp, so it's certainly still a possibility, but he probably is going to want to go somewhere where he has a better opportunity to get snaps. I think because they think Jordan Mason is better, and I'm pretty inclined to agree. Broccoli the Pug asks, by the way, I'm going to do a Patreon video on Jordan Mason sooner rather than later. I think he might actually be next. I just released one on Will Fries and Ryan Kelly, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. If you want to see a tape breakdown of those guys, my Patreon is less than $4 a month, and you get a whole bunch of stuff. Also, a lot of these videos will be made free sometime in the future. So if you don't want to pay, you're welcome to wait. Broccoli the Pug asks, I know Will Reichard was a draft pick last year, and I personally love him. Is there any chance we have a kicker battle this offseason? I am like a very absolutist about like always kicker battle. Bring in an undrafted rookie. Bring in someone, some random veteran. Give him someone to beat. Keep him on his toes. I think it's just healthy to do. But obviously you have to know the mindset and the brain of your kicker. It's such a mental thing. If that's the kind of thing that would wreck him, like it's up to your special teams coordinator, your Nate Kading kicking coach kind of guy, to understand what that'll do to him. But assuming he's not the kind of guy that would respond poorly to that, then I think it's always worth it because it's basically free. And hey, what if he wins the competition and you upgrade at kicker for free? We can all be interested in that, right? I got a bunch more questions and your hot takes coming up here on Town Hall Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Selection Sunday is in the books. We've got brackets, and that means FanDuel is your go-to spot for live bets, for parlaying your whole bracket into one. They actually have a whole tab for it where you can take your bracket, put it into like a big parlay, and like however much of it you want to actually put into that, you can kind of have like that extra rooting interest. But if your bracket is busted, it can also give you a way to bet on a game between two teams you didn't even have getting this far. That's a thing that definitely is going to happen to me. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who ends up cutting down the nets. All you got to do is win a $5 bet. You just South Carolina women's basketball to win their first game, or UConn. Like, just do it. And $5 on that, you get 40-1 odds on it. Assuming you win, you get $200 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate you all so very much. Moving on here with Town Hall Tuesday. The next question comes from Kit Fisto's Dental Plan, who asks, thoughts on Jeff Okudah visiting the Vikings? And the Vikings' apparent confidence in their ability to keep players healthier than other teams, given their signing of several players with extensive and or recent injury history. So there's two parts to that. They have a lot of confidence in their ability to like treat injury and like rehab or whatever, but also their confidence to evaluate the severity of injury. Rondale Moore visited the Vikings as well. I'm not covering like visits day to day necessarily. I'll get to you when guys actually sign, but a lot of people come in and out of the building and it would just get exhausting. But yeah, Jeff Okudah did spend Monday in the building. Oops, reveal. I'm recording after midnight and I got confused by what the day my computer said. This is healthy. But yeah, Jeff Okudah spent the day in the building. Who knows what if they're going to sign him or not or whatever. Rondale Moore came to the building and left without a deal. Rondale Moore coming off of a nasty knee injury. Part of that interview is going to be a medical evaluation. And if he left the building without a deal, as good a reason as any would be that they were not satisfied with the results of that medical evaluation. I'm not reporting or anything like that. It's one reason of a bunch that it could be, but that's something. So their ability to like properly evaluate those things, but the injured players that they are signing are none of those guys have the kinds of, with the exception of Ryan Kelly, none of those guys have the kinds of injuries that linger. Pec injuries don't necessarily linger. Bone fractures like the tibia injury Will Fries had. Yeah, it takes him out for a long time, but it doesn't linger. The knee and neck stuff that Ryan Kelly dealt with, that's a little bit spookier. So I do think that they have a lot of confidence in their medical staff. I remember all of the like sports science stories from 2022. I think that is still kind of lingering a little bit, as well as the way that they've handled JJ McCarthy's injury. I think that the organization seems really happy with how that has all gone down. and how they've kind of taken care of that, gotten, the right long-term decision made for him, but he's comfortably going to be back by for the start of the season. So they've got a lot of reasons to be pretty happy with that. But it's not as in control as you want it to be. You don't control all of it. There's so much of it that is just luck and taking these additional risks. There is absolutely a chance that all these injured players re-injure. But I don't know. They got 17 games out of Aaron Jones last year. So I guess, who am I to judge? Sketchconk asks, I saw Brian Baldinger doing one of his Twitter breakdowns and talking about how good Jordan Mason was with pitches. Kind of figured the Vikings ran a lot of pitches last season because the interior O-line sucked, but I was wondering how you see that working into the run game and if they'll keep doing it. Sorry for the lack of running knowledge and if I'm asking something dumb. This is far from something dumb. I mean, look, no dumb questions, okay, on Town Hall Tuesday. If your question is super dumb, I'll just delete it. But if it's not interesting. But no, this is a very smart question. And the pitch process, to a running back, I'm not familiar with his Baldinger clip, so I'm not quite sure what he was getting at with that. But the pitch process for a running back was it's a lot of acceleration right away. It's the burst, which Jordan Mason has. He's good at that. A lot of running backs are too. But the actual toss process, to me, is something you should be able to take for granted. You drill it all the time. If you're screwing up tosses, that's a really bad mistake. The Vikings had one last year all season. And even that feels like it was too many. But a reason you would toss, you want to get to the ball to the perimeter quickly, right? That either means you're trying to avoid a problem on the interior. So the Vikings used it a ton against the Titans, almost exclusively tosses. At least it felt like that against the Titans. And that was because Jeffrey Simmons was a problem, but they didn't necessarily do that against Chicago, where you weren't as scared of the interior. So that was a bit more of a game plan thing. But yeah, if he's good at that, and so that tool is in your game plan, then great. But you don't want to necessarily do that against the Lions and toss to Aiden Hutchinson where he can just chase it down, right? You want to make him go through somebody. You don't want to just make it, the play doesn't work if Aiden Hutchinson is fast, bad news, right? So there's a time and place to deploy it. Jordan Mason being good at it means that club is in your bag. That's nice. Mr. Mayor the Fourth asks, part of the Vikings offensive strategy seems to be to draw a lot of DPI calls. How effective is that, given that in the important games with high stakes or in prime time, refs tend not to call DPI for fear of rigging allegations? I'm not 100% that's true. I would love to see actual comprehensive data on that. It maybe feels that way, that they call it looser in the playoffs, but I think some crews call it tight and some crews call it loose. And I think that's the Vikings are just a team that's going to be super sensitive to those fluctuations. They're just going to really be advantaged on a tightly calling crew and disadvantaged on a loose calling crew. And that's just the way it is. But I do think that the idea, I don't know if it's an on purpose thing. It's just the builds of these guys, right? Jordan Addison is a small player. Justin Jefferson isn't a small, but he has a slighter frame for his size, for his build. And so they're both guys that are more susceptible to physical coverage. And it's just kind of a nice perk that sometimes that spins into flags if teams aren't careful about it. But if you are careful about it, yeah, that can be a thing. And I think the way that the Vikings try to mitigate that problem isn't to just expect flags. It's to stack them up, get free releases, use motion, all the other schematic ways to get somebody a nice release. Save big money at Grenard's. Phenomenal. Says, seeing a lot of people saying just because Kwesi signed X at Y position, that doesn't mean we should rule out drafting that position, running back, O-line, whatever. My question is there a position that is ruled out? Yeah, man, probably not. Good point. I don't really have a fullback, I guess, but I don't know. You guess you need your CJ Ham succession plan somewhere too. Quarterback would be pretty surprising, but if they end up not signing a backup quarterback for comp pick reasons, maybe they draft one in, 7th round, get some rando, something like that happens. Those are maybe the most, but in the top 100, we can rule out certain things. We can rule out a top 100 quarterback, probably, unless they really need a backup, right? We can rule out a top 100 fullback, those kinds of things. But shoot, yeah, like you can never have too many receivers. You can never have too many corners. O-line, D-line, you can always add depth to that and youth, and they got older players that you're already looking for succession plans for now. So, yeah, is there a position that's ruled out? Yeah, man, probably not. Johnny Scoops asks, is KOC wading into a 2-year prove it or lose it window? I'm starting to feel like he's a regular season shark. The dude just won Coach of the Year. If he's in a prove it or lose it window, who isn't? Actually, maybe that's a good point. I mean, it's, NFL is not for long, right? 2 years from now, we've gone one and done twice. Yeah, it's going to be like a more of a narrative, but that requires this result to repeat itself twice. That's rough. So I don't think he's in any kind of, there has never been a longer leash. There was just a report surrounding the Aaron Rodgers stuff that ownership and Kwesi have so much trust in Kevin O'Connell that they don't even really feel the need to give input on his decision at quarterback. They're just like, you take it, dude. We trust you. Like, this guy's got maybe the coldest seat in the league, honestly. Like, except maybe like Nick Sirianni, because he's literally coming off in Lombardi. So, feeling like he's a regular season shark, I super sympathize with that. I get it. I remind you that playoffs are a 1-game sample size, right? Like, it's tough. It's also different. And you can maybe make an argument that like his culture, the good vibes of the Kevin O'Connell culture is, it contributes to maybe not rising to the increased intensity of the playoffs. Like, I could see you trying to make that argument, but it'd be really, really difficult to fabricate that argument or to formulate that argument. Sorry. Because you don't really have the information that you would need to back it up. Like, it's a theory that makes sense that, passes the smell test on its face. But like, how do you prove that? You can't really, kind of just have to take them at their word that is or isn't happening. So it's a really, really difficult thing to do at being a regular season. Like, it's the only thing different between the regular season and the playoffs. Otherwise, you're just playing good teams. And guess what? They win too. Like, two good teams can enter a playoff game. One of them has to lose it. It doesn't mean that team wasn't good. So the 2024 Vikings were a really good team. Fact, period. So yeah, no, he's probably got one of the longest, if not the longest leash in the league. Blake asks, have you used ChatGPT for any football learning questions? If so, have you found it accurate? So I actually played around with this. I went to ChatGPT. I asked it if it knew the difference between a 3-4 and a 4-3 defense. This is always a good litmus test for if people really know like basic football. Like, if they've played enough Madden, they should know, right? So like, how does this, do you know the difference between a 3-4 and a 4-3? And it gave me incredibly like surface level. Well, a 3-4 has 3 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers, and the outside linebackers can sometimes walk up to the line of scrimmage. But it didn't, start talking to me about like odd or even fronts or, over under fronts or any of the kind of true differences that come with that. And then when I started to ask the difference between like, okay, what's the difference between a 3-4 defensive end and a 4-3 defensive end? And it just started kind of going on to nonsense about like, well, sometimes they're stronger and sometimes they're faster. And it like meant nothing. It was like, it felt like something the characters of Veep would write, is trying to make it seem like they knew about the thing. Like an essay you would write about a topic you did not study, but you need to hit the word count, like that kind of thing. So I found it not ever like absolutely wrong, but far from helpful when I tested that. But I have never used ChatGPT for my own like learning purposes. Usually I only do it when I'm like bored and I want to see if it'll like, if I can like get it to say something that would get it canceled. That's a fun game to play. Scene season is over. Asks, how do you feel about Kenneth Grant? You want to hashtag my guys. Love that dude. I mean, obviously this was asked before free agency, so obviously his odds of becoming a Viking have gone down significantly. But that doesn't change my take on him. I think he's going to be a really good player in the NFL. Copus asks, how do you feel about Walter Rouse and Michael Juergens as potential O-line starters? Probably not. Michael Juergens had the backup center job on lock last year, appears to still have it. So they're comfortable with him if Ryan Kelly goes down, and with the injury history, that is a pretty important question. But as a starter, much higher bar. And I don't know if that's, and I hated what he did in the preseason anyway. So like, I'm already a little sketched out about how much confidence the Vikings have in him. And that's just, we have a starter in front of you, but he's kind of got an injury history. Like, that's not even that much confidence. There are a lot more hot takes. I want to make sure that I have the the time to get to them. So we'll get to as many as we can coming up next on Locked On Vikings.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, it is time for, I saw somebody say this on Blue Sky, not a sports thing at all, but they called Tuesday Trash Take Tuesday, and then everybody said their really bad opinions. I love that. I'm not going to take it, but that's the energy we're going for here. It's time for your hot takes. You confessed to me your takes that you were not willing to put in public next to your name. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So if you ever have any thoughts late, deep in the night that you want to confess anonymously, I will protect you. Some of you still put your name on this. I don't need that. I don't need your name on, protect your anonymity. Dear Abby, this, come on. But a hopeless optimist is going to kick us off by saying the combination of Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah will not only win multiple Super Bowls, but go down as the best GM or head coach pairing in Vikings history, and maybe one of the best in league history. Cook. The second part kind of naturally follows. Anybody who wins the Super Bowl immediately is the best in Vikings history to me. I think, accomplish what Bud Grant couldn't. You get to go above Bud Grant on the Mount Rushmore. But yeah, especially if you win multiple, you are now synonymous with the Vikings. You become the Chuck Noll for the Vikings. You get it. So, very hot take, but Cook. I'm not going to argue with you. The Last Viking says, bring the Vikings home. Given the name of the team, the Vikings should not play games in London. They should play a yearly game in one of the Scandinavian countries, shifting between Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Oslo. So I would love that. I love Stockholm. I went to Stockholm after the London game in 2022. We went to that, and then we spun that into a visit to Stockholm. Beautiful city. Couldn't get enough of it. So I would be big time into that, and I would be there. That said, the historical Vikings have a, we'll call it tight-knit relationship with London, and I don't think that that's wholly inappropriate based on the namesake of the team, but I see what you're saying. F them picks says offseason moves shouldn't revolve around comp picks. A future to mid-late round pick shouldn't dictate who you sign now. It's a very Vikings fan base thing to obsess over late round picks, but let's just sign the best free agent class that fits our needs instead of taking a lottery ticket. I super hear you. I don't even think this is that hot of a take. I think this is actually a pretty good point and a good thing to consider, right? Which is why I've been I've been careful every time I'm doing the comp pick thing. It's worth tracking, right? You shouldn't just not pay attention to it. If you have, a D tackle that you're okay with and another D tackle that you're pretty okay with, but one of them comes with a 3rd round pick next year attached to him, yeah, sign that guy instead. It doesn't feel to me as though the Vikings have stymied themselves except for at backup quarterback, which is not a scarce position. There are enough backup quarterbacks out there that everyone can get a backup quarterback, even if you're the last one to do it. That is looking at the list and looking at who's left, they're going to be fine there. So they are sacrificing their choice of backup quarterback for a 3rd round pick. That is a cost and a benefit, right? That absolutely not a costless thing to do. And so what you're pointing out here, super valid. I do think that that's worth it, but I think the idea that if you're totally, pulling yourself out of all the, if they didn't sign Will Fries because they wanted another comp pick, I think that would be bad. But Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen are good players. So even if the comp formula wasn't a part of this, that might still have ended up, being the place the Vikings go. They were, values coming off of injuries, older. Jonathan Allen wanted to be here, all that stuff. It still could have ended up that way. So offseason moves shouldn't revolve around comp picks. I don't think they're revolving too bad around comp picks, but you're definitely right. You don't want to over prioritize this. A frequent question asker says, after winning their second consecutive offseason championship, the Bears will finish last in the division and fire Ryan Poles by next offseason. The only issue I have with this is that those guys have won 10 offseasons in a row. And the final one comes from somebody I'll call Whiskey. And Whiskey says, this one knocked me out of my chair. This is, I think, the hottest one that we've gotten in the short history of doing hot takes on Town Hall Tuesday here, who says, I know this is unpopular, but it actually doesn't matter that much to me if the Vikings win the Super Bowl. Like, what? Whoa! I don't think I've ever heard of, I have heard a myriad Vikings fans, question askers, YouTube commenters, people sending me emails, people in person, like face-to-face conversations say that like winning the Super Bowl is the most important thing. They don't care about anything else. They don't care if the Vikings sign, people, hardened criminals or, horrible people. They don't care if the money is wrong. They don't care if the stadium doesn't get built. They don't care about this or that or whatever. They just won a Super Bowl. I've heard a million versions of that take. I have never heard this. This is the first. This is a first for me in a life of being a Vikings fan and a multi-year career of covering the Vikings. I have never heard it doesn't matter to me if the Vikings win the Super Bowl. Phenomenal stuff, Whiskey, but Whiskey continues. I want them to win in the playoffs so I can see them play for one more week. Once they get to the Super Bowl, it doesn't matter that much because I get to see them every week and not lose interest in the NFL. Also, an absolutely insane reason behind that. Like, I don't care about the Super Bowl that much because I'm just happy because it's an entertainment product and, winning isn't everything. I would kind of get, but just the fact that the Super Bowl's the last game doesn't even unlock a new game for them. That doesn't even get me another Vikings game. So therefore I don't care is buck wild. I respect it so deeply. It is insane in a way that I can simply sit back and respect. I have absolutely no response or retort to this. Congratulations, Whiskey. You win Town Hall Tuesday. I will talk to you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.